That very first question, what is inquiry anyway? So here we go. There are lots of words that you may be familiar with and have heard kind of thrown around in educational settings. And you see those words on this screen: action research, teacher inquiry, classroom research, self-study, practitioner inquiry. And all of these words in the field of education are often used interchangeably and synonymously. What's important to know is whatever of these words you're familiar with, what we're talking about, whatever word you use, is simply this: the systematic, intentional study by teachers of their own practice. And there you have it. That is the definition of inquiry. But now let's go back to all those words that are used interchangeably. And I want to share with you why, in my work, my preference has always been the word inquiry. And to do so, I'm going to ask you in a minute, not quite yet, but in a minute, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And then I'm going to say one word. And when I say that word with your eyes closed, I want you to capture the first image that comes into your mind when you hear that word, almost like you're taking a picture of it. And then I'll ask you to open your eyes, and we will use that image to discuss my preference for the word inquiry. All right, so I know you're watching this video all by yourself, and so it might seem a little silly, but now is the time. I want you to close your eyes, and here is the word: research. Capture that first image that comes into your mind. Okay, now open your eyes, and you may very well see in front of you a similar image to what you captured in your head. When I teach about the process of inquiry, if I use the word action research or teacher research or classroom research, it usually sends some bristles up the spines of teachers when they're first introduced to the process, because they think of these images that are associated with that word research. And that's, on the two corners, you see the image of a book and an image of a journal. And it's about research is about pouring through lots of books and lots of journal articles and just extended reading on a particular subject. So that might be one image, and maybe that's the one that you conjured. Another image, you kind of see a formula on this slide, a mathematics formula. Another image that often comes to mind when we think of the word research is like statistics and crunching numbers. And that, isn't something that many teachers like love and embrace. A third image that might come to your mind is just lots of hours when you think about research, filling up notebook after notebook of copious notes that you take as you engage in the research process. And then finally, another image might be the one you see on the upper right hand of your screen. And that's of like a scientist in a white lab coat that's removed from the research and has created an experimental control group and then a treatment group. And they are working to be objective and to find out through an experiment what works best. So all of these images that you see on the slide and that you might have captured in your own mind, in your own head, again, they're not something that teachers often feel like they want to embrace as a part of their work, because the work life of a teacher is already so busy and you're doing so many things. making hundreds and thousands of decisions a day in your teaching practice and preparing and grading and actually doing the act of teaching. To think of adding another layer on top of that just feels a little overwhelming. So I am happy to share with you that all of these images we just discussed are really antithetical to the process of inquiry that you are going to be introduced to today and that you are going to engage in as a part of your work as a participant in the PEPSA program. Inquiry isn't something that's added on top of teaching. Inquiry is something that becomes a part of teaching. And in order to further illustrate that, and why my word that I like to use for this process is inquiry and not some of those other words, action research, teacher research, classroom research, there's nothing wrong with them, but I prefer that term inquiry to help us debunk some of the myths about what this process is about. So it is not about doing an experiment. It is not about trying to divide the children that you work with into two groups, and one gets an experiment treatment, and one you do business as usual, and then you try to compare and contrast the two groups and figure out what works best. Teaching is so complex, there never is a best. So that approach to research does not make sense for a teacher inquirer. What inquiry is about is a much more naturalistic form of research. And you see on this slide somebody you might recognize. That is Jane Goodall. And you know, she is quite famous for her anthropology work and her work with primates. And her research entailed actually going and living with and within a chimpanzee community and studying the chimpanzees in their natural setting. She didn't try to put them into two different groups. She didn't try to uh, treat them in some particular way and see how that treatment worked or didn't work. Rather, she was a keen and astute observer. And this is much more about what the inquiry process is about. As a teacher, you are living within your natural setting and you're studying your natural setting and the students that you work with, observing them keenly, noticing what's happening. Okay, so I hope that helps you feel comfortable and confident moving forward with this notion of inquiry, that it isn't something on top of what you do as a teacher, but it's just a natural part of what you do as a teacher.